Hi, I'm Liam. This is Book of Films, and I've just got back from seeing Infinity War the second time. I've seen it twice in one day, which is pretty extreme. But I wanted to watch it a second time because I wanted to do this spoiler review, but I wanted to make sure I'd seen it twice to kind of fully get over it and get over all the emotions of seeing it the first time. To clarify, this is a spoiler review. If you do not want to know anything, I'm going to be spoiling everything right off the bat. So if you've seen the film, I want to just go through everything and tell you my thoughts and whatnot. So please click away because in about 5 seconds I'm going to spoil everything. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so obviously if you're in the same boat as me and you've just seen this, you know that everyone dies. Not everyone, but 50% of the characters die. And even though this is one of the predicted endings that I had in my head for ages now, seeing it happen is completely traumatizing, and I think it's an incredibly bold move. And seeing it at midnight, there was lots of adult fans, but seeing it today, as I've just come out of the cinema, seeing children watch this film and watch their childhood heroes die is absolutely terrifying. But a lot of people don't know this is a two-parter, which is weird because obviously, you take things for granted as a fan, you read things online, you keep up with the news, and you know that there's a second part coming next year, but a lot of people don't know that, and especially as it doesn't have a title, people don't know this film has a sequel, and people don't know what they're necessarily getting into. I saw these two girls, they were talking about it, and they genuinely thought that was the end, and that was it. That's how their saga that they'd watched it for 10 years, just everyone's died. But that aside, I'm gonna, first of all, I don't necessarily want to review it. I'm not going to give this a number out of 10. I've always found it weird to review a film like this because it's very much, as a fan, this is a sum of its parts. And reviewing this as a film versus reviewing this as a Marvel film is a completely different experience, and I don't think there's any way I can attach a number, not yet anyway. But I just wanted to go through what I liked and what I didn't like, because overall this is an amazing film and a huge feat for what it does. But as you break down the parts, some of it doesn't quite work in my opinion, which is weird because I don't like the individual parts of the film, but I do like the film as a whole, which is a weird thing to say. But to start, Iron Man, his team, so we're going to break it down to Thor's team, Iron Man's team, Cap's team. Basically they kind of hold the plot together in a triangle shape, and Iron Man's team, obviously they get the most to do, they have the most fun interactions between the group. Seeing Doctor Strange in his best performance, he's much better here than he is actually in his own movie. Spider-Man is kind of just there, but he gets to steal some of his scenes, and he gets a nice relationship with Iron Man. Iron Man steals the show once again. He has in all 3 Avengers movies, which is a little bit annoying to me, but to see them and then to see them interact with the Guardians, but an interesting trio of Guardians, kind of mixing up the formula with that team as well. It's in a unique location, seeing the group interact and seeing the kind of two very arrogant characters kind of come head to head is a very interesting thing to see, and that group clearly does the best out of any of it, and they are the group that I want to see the most. However, I do think Thor's story in the film is the best part of it, which is weird to say again because I don't actually think it's the most entertaining, but I think Thor's quest to build a weapon and get revenge, and the single scene with him talking to Rocket about what more he has to lose, is actually the most powerful part in the film and makes him the MVP of the film. But I don't think the scenes on Nidavellir work at all. I'd been predicting that Peter Dinklage had been playing Atiri, King of the Dwarves, for ages, which Michael disagreed on with me. He said he was playing Pip the Troll, which was complete insanity, and we had many arguments about that, but I was right. But to see him as this 50-foot Peter Dinklage Tyrion character is weird, and I didn't expect it. And coming straight off Ragnarok, which is one of the best looking MCU films, it's a shame that the storyline for him building a new hammer, as great as it was, didn't have the visual flair of Ragnarok. because this is one thing this film does totally achieve, which is bringing all these disparate tones and marrying them together beautifully, because we get the Guardians, we get Captain America, we get Iron Man, we get Thor, and all these characters who kind of have these different tones and feels, and putting them together is an absolute joy to watch. But seeing Thor's story kind of go in a little bit of a dull way is annoying, based on the fact that we've just had Ragnarok, which is a great film, despite the fact that this film pretty much takes everything he learned in that film and throws it away. He gets his eye back, he gets his hammer back, he loses his people, at least most of them. He does say in the film that I lost half my people, so I'm guessing, say, Valkyrie and Korg and Meek are still out there somewhere. But it doesn't make it entirely clear, especially when the first shot of the movie is Heimdall dying on the floor. But those two aside, the obvious person who doesn't get enough to do is Captain America, who almost isn't really in the film. He has a handful of lines, and he kind of turns up, he fights, he says he doesn't take orders anymore, but he doesn't really have any sort of, meat on the bones of his story. He's just there to protect the others. And I think that's a necessary. I think what has been discussed by the Russo brothers and the screenwriters, Christopher Marcus and Steve McFeely, is that the characters that didn't get quite enough to do in this film, say Black Widow and Captain America, will have more to do in the next film, which makes sense because they're both alive at the end. But yeah, it was just weird, especially when one little pet peeve for me is that Iron Man doesn't actually make it back to Earth by the end of the film. I wanted to see some sort of Civil War resolution, not necessarily resolution because we have two parts for a reason, but not having him on Earth means we're going to have to spend 10-15 minutes of the next film showing how Nebula and Iron Man get back to Earth and continue that. But in reality, it could have worked better if, all the Avengers had assembled and they still lose, which is a devastating thing, knowing that as they've all come together after 2 or 3 years apart, that they still lose. But moving on, I think the people who steal the show more than anyone is the Guardians of the Galaxy, who almost overshadow the entire film. They get a lot of time, they get a lot of development. Star-Lord and Gamora especially. This is Gamora's probably biggest and most significant part in the film. Obviously, spoilers, she dies. And we get to see the Red Skull return, which is a big shock, and everyone in the cinema went, oh my god, that's the Red Skull, when obviously we thought it was Death, as in the character Death, who they just gender swapped, which is a weird thing for them to do, especially when Thanos is supposed to be in love with Death. But yeah, obviously when it turned out to be the Red Skull, that was a huge surprise, and I think that's a great way to deal with the character and just tell people to shut up, because they will never stop talking about the Red Skull. But yeah, the Guardians get tons to do. They get all the best comedic moments. Rocket is the only one still alive at the end of the film, so I think, based on the fact that they had a lot of time in this movie, they won't have too much time in the next movie, apart from Nebula, who's basically surviving because she didn't get much time in this movie, and she's our main Thanos exposition dumper. And Rocket, just because he's fun to see a raccoon kind of hang out with all the rest of the characters. But yeah, I think Guardians definitely stole this movie. If that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not quite sure. But I don't imagine they'll have as much time in the next movie. Talking of Thanos, I predicted his motivations pretty much correctly. I predicted earlier that he was some sort of, I said cosmic gardener, if that makes sense, and that as life becomes too out of hand, he kind of trims the bushes. That's a really dumb analogy for what he actually does, but I do like his motivations, and he does seem relatively developed, and he is sort of sympathetic, saying that Gamora, someone who hates him and someone that he hasn't seen in 4 years, is his biggest is the biggest love that he has to sacrifice. And when baby Gamora asks what did it cost, and he says everything, sometimes I don't think I believe that, because sacrificing one of his like 6 children, who he claims is his favourite, but she hates him anyway, is kind of a weird way to... It does make you connect with him, especially as she's dead now, but at the same time it's like, come on, like, do you really care about them that much? And it's kind of got weird, creepy overtones when he abducts all these little girls. But I don't know, I do think Thanos is a great villain, and I do think he's one of the best villains, and I do think they did great work with him. Now, talking of the ending, amazing, absolutely incredibly risky, incredibly ballsy, incredibly controversial, for what take like the biggest blockbuster in the world has just killed all its main characters and ended on a cliffhanger and not really informed people in any solid way that this is a 2-parter. And I imagine a lot of people in 6 months' time are going to be really glad when they see that trailer for whatever the sequel is called. But yeah, I don't know. Ant-Man and Hawkeye don't even make it into this film, which, depending on what they do in the next film, could be a great thing or a terrible thing. But as it stands, still alive are Iron Man, Nebula, Captain America, Thor, Rocket, Hulk, Black Widow, War Machine. I think that's it. But it's a very random collection of people. I would have kept, personally, I would have kept Winter Soldier and Scarlet Witch alive. Scarlet Witch so she can continue that mourning of Vision and showing perhaps her mental instability. And I would have also kept Winter Soldier alive to when Iron Man finally gets back to Earth to kind of resolve that Civil War beef between Cap, Winter Soldier and Iron Man. But not necessarily saying that just because a character has died in this does not mean they're going to be the focus of the next film, because take someone like Black Panther, who's technically died, even though he doesn't really fit into the Avengers narrative too much. He didn't really get anything to do in this film at all, really. Despite it taking place in Wakanda, he kind of just turns up, he appears in his suit, he fights in the background, and he dies. But you know, with everyone in this film, it's a miracle that everyone has kind of got their moment, really. But I do think the people left behind will pick up the first half of the story for the next one, and then I think whatever the time travel involves, this is my main worry, is that they're obviously going back in time to change something. Don't know how. I have a feeling I'm going to make a little theory video on potentially adapting the quantum bands. They don't use the quantum bands in the same way that the comics use them, but if you take a look at a few of the set photos, and if you add the fact that Ant-Man and the Wasp is exploring the quantum realm, they might be taking a few liberties with the comic book material and adapting some sort of homemade time travel device based on our very, very limited knowledge of the first one. What I don't hope for, though, is we know in this sequel to this movie, they are returning to the Battle of New York, but I really, really do not hope they Days of Future Past this, which obviously was a great movie for the Fox universe, but as the MCU hasn't done anything wrong, if they overwrite, say, Phase 2 and beyond to kind of change things, I think that's a huge problem, and I do not want them to A, recast characters, and B, undermine character arcs that have already happened. Now, I think what might be potentially cool is that there is a 2-year gap in between Civil War and Infinity War, so potentially kind of going back in time to that point and changing things might help things. I don't know how this film's I don't even know how they're gonna win the day, essentially, because the whole plot of this movie takes place in about 12 hours, and they use a percentage of Thanos' might. This is like one of those, as Tony says, donut ships. and seeing more than one of those and more of those Outriders and the Chitauri army return, and I do not know how they're going to defeat this, and I do not want them to use time travel as an easy plot to bring everyone back to life. There has to be stakes still, and this just raised the stakes dramatically. But knowing I want to see the next one pick up with a potential post-apocalyptic setting in which humanity's crumbled, perhaps Hydra have taken influence over the half of humanity that remain. But I honestly don't know. What a confusing, what a dramatic film. I am pleased with it. I do like it. I hope some of the characters who didn't get much to do this film get lots to do in the next film. I do want to make sure that the characters aren't undermined, and that the stakes are kept high. But overall, it's a crazy film, perhaps with holes and with weak points and strong points here and there. It's a very long film, and it's a very up and down film in terms of tone and story potential, but I do like it. I do think it makes the sum of its parts. If you overlook the fact that some of them don't work, you have to think that this is a film 10 years in the making with like 75 characters, and I do think it absolutely nails it and is one of the ballsiest films in Hollywood at the moment, and is one of the ballsiest endings in the history of cinema, basically, to take a film this big and completely subvert everyone's expectations. And now obviously it's basically like reviewing half a movie, so I do want to see where the next one goes, and I do want to see how obviously Captain Marvel fits into this. I haven't really covered her. I might cover what I think is going to happen in the next movie, and in Captain Marvel in another video. But I do think the Quantum Realm, her ability to perhaps time travel, or somehow how she time travels, and how that has to do with Avengers 4, are all to do with each other, thinking that because Ant-Man and the Wasp and Captain Marvel come out between part 1 and part 2, I do think they will give us clues to how the day is basically going to be saved and how time is going to be reversed. But it's such a complex one, and it's such a great mystery, and I think Marvel has absolutely nailed it and nailed their timing. And if Ant-Man and the Wasp and Captain Marvel do deliver on that mystery, I think the year between here and the next Avengers film will go very quickly, and I think they will have fans incredibly hooked. This is a very exciting day for me, and I will undoubtedly see the film again. Please let me know what you think, and I might make a follow-up video to this, because there's just so much to dissect. But if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe maybe, and I will see you in the next one.